أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وأشهد أن سيدنا محمدا عبد الله ورسوله اللهم انفعنا بما علمتنا وعلمنا ما ينفعنا وزدنا من فضلك علما وتعليما ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم وصلى الله تعالى على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين وبعد. My dear most respected brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. May the peace and blessings of Almighty Allah be with each and every one of you. Today we continue our discussion on the special hadith of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, referring to the virtues of the month of Dhul Hijjah, and specifically the first 10 days of the month of Dhul Hijjah. The hadith of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, in which he says, "Ma min ayyamin al-amalu as-salihu fiha ahabbu ila Allahi min hadhihi al-ayyam." There are no days in which good deeds are more loved by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala than in these days, meaning or referring to the first 10 days of the blessed month or the sacred month of Dhul Hijjah. And we mentioned in our previous discussions some of the recommended deeds, some of the good things we can do in this special month of Dhul Hijjah. The first of which is to perform the Hajj and Umrah. This time is special for us, and it is the time when Hajj and Umrah is recommended to be done. In fact, it is the only time in which Hajj can be performed. Of course, Umrah can be done anytime throughout the year, but the days of Dhul Hijjah are the days of Hajj. The specific rituals of the Hajj, starting from the 8th day of Dhul Hijjah, when the Hujjaj or the pilgrims would proceed to Mina, and then on the 9th of Dhul Hijjah, the day of Arafat, they would go to the plains of Arafat for al-Wukuf bi Arafah, to stay on the plains of Arafah, and then to return on that night to Muzdalifah and to spend the night in Muzdalifah, and then to return to Mina on the 10th of Dhul Hijjah, Yawm al-Nahar, the day of sacrifice, considered the greatest day of the year, to perform these great acts of ibadah, including the Qurbani and the sacrifice, the Ramyul Jamaratul Aqaba, the stoning of the large Aqaba, and to perform Tawaf al-Ifadah, and so on and so forth, the great deeds that's done for Hajj. Then secondly, we mention the importance of fasting on these days of Dhul Hijjah, and specifically the first 9 days of Dhul Hijjah, in which good deeds are recommended to be done. And among the most virtuous of good deeds is to fast for the sake and pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In addition to that, we mentioned that for those who are not able to fast all of these days, then they should fast as many of the days as possible. And if that also is not possible, then at least one day, the day of Arafat, should be observed in fasting, because the Prophet ﷺ says that صَوْمُ يَوْمَ عَرَفَةَ يُكَفِّرُ السَّنَةَ الْمَاضِيَةَ وَالْبَاقِيَةَ, that the fasting on the day of Arafat is forgiveness or expiation for sins of the preceding year and the following year. And many are the great virtues and benefits of fasting for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The third thing we mention is to engage in dhikr for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because in the hadith, the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, after saying that these days are the days in which deeds are most loved by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then he said, recite as frequent as you can the takbir and the tahleel and the tahmeed, the words of dhikr for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we mentioned this specific practice that we would encourage everyone to revive in our community at two levels, at a personal level or at an individual level, and then at a collective level or communal level. And so at a personal level, to recite the words of takbir that the Prophet ﷺ taught the Sahabas, and several of the Sahabas would go and do so publicly, including Sayyidina Abdullah ibn Umar, Sayyidina Abu Huraira, as mentioned in the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, and in the statements of these Sahabas, that they would go out in the streets of Medina and recite the words of takbir. Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, La ilaha illallah, Wallahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Walillahi alhamd. And so individually, each one of us should strive to recite these words of takbir in these 10 days of Dhul Hijjah, this special period of time. These days that are the most virtuous days of the year. And and then to encourage others with a collective recitation. And so in our homes, to encourage the members of our family, and perhaps to sit down after the 5 daily salah, or in the morning, or in the evening, or whenever we have the time, and spend a few minutes or as much time as we can to recite these words of takbirat, of glorification and exaltation for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then in our masjids, we should try to encourage this practice, and wherever we are, wherever we find it appropriate, to engage in this remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to make these days special, because they are the most virtuous days of the year. The Prophet ﷺ says, "Ma min ayyamin al-amalu as-salihu fiha ahabbu ila Allah min hadhihi al-ayyam." Including the last 10 days of the month of Ramadan, these 10 days of Dhul Hijjah are more virtuous than those days. Of course, the last 10 nights of Ramadan are more virtuous than the 10 nights of Dhul Hijjah. Because the last 10 nights of Ramadan contain Laylatul Qadr, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us that Laylatul Qadr khayru min alfi shahrin, it is better than 1,000 months in rewards and virtues and blessings from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that is the way that the scholars have reconciled the various hadith that talks about the virtuous qualities of the different times of the year, specifically the 10 days of Dhul Hijjah, and then the first 10 days of Dhul Hijjah and the last 10 days of Ramadan. A difference between the virtues of the days and the virtues of the nights, as we've explained. So the fasting is important, the dhikr to be recited is important, specifically the takbirat that should be recited individually and collectively during this period of time.